Identity is this quite absurd thing. A lot of the language around identity is that it is something that you choose, but a lot of the time it's chosen for you and you're kind of roped into it. And I think that humor is a good way to sort of pierce the seriousness and the absurdity of things. At the end of the day, I'm just an idiot walking around.
Welcome to this week's episode of Socially Democratic. Rapha Manajem comes from a funny family, which is helpful when trying to navigate his many overlapping identities. He's an Australian with German and Yemeni heritage, Jewish, but frequently mistaken for being Muslim. But most significantly, he's a Labor volunteer and a stand-up comedian. A funny man in politics. How on earth does he manage? Hear from Rapha himself after a word from our sponsors. The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in 2025, then hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members as well. And you can join our community for free or for as little as $1.50 a month. And you too can help support this podcast. All paid members receive a welcome gift, so if you have recently signed up, please check your inbox for a message from our producer asking for your shipping address, because without that, then we can't send you your merch. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. Maurice Blackburn has been fighting for workers' rights in Australia for more than 100 years. They believe the law should serve everyone and not just those that can afford it. So for empathetic and expert legal support, call Maurice Blackburn Lawyers today. All right, let's get on with today's episode. We are taping this one on a Thursday afternoon on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. Today's episode is a change of pace somewhat because the Melbourne International Comedy Festival is on our doorstep. I think it kicks off next week. And we're joined on the line by a bloke who is both a social democrat, that is his entry into this podcast, but he's also a comedian. And we thought we'd lighten it up a little bit before we get into the heady episodes of a federal election, which I think is going to be called any moment now. And he joins us on the line from what I call the Borscht Belt. Rapha Manajem. I fucked up your name.
That's cool. It's my fault for having a tricky name, you know.
No.
Yeah, just
Manajem.
Yeah, Manajem. It's Yemeni in background, so there aren't many Manajems.
No, there's not. And it's the goddamn emphasis on the wrong syllable that just throws me every time.
Yeah. My problem, I do a lot of emceeing, right? And so comedy is very diverse, and there are 16 syllables in some of the names and someone with an ethnic name getting it wrong, 5-10 comedians in it. It's terrible because I lose my right to be kind of pretentious about it or look down on people for not. So all good. Do you want to do it from the top?
I think we just keep going, right?
Yeah, good. Well, I'm a fan of the podcast, and I've been listening for many years, and I think especially when you jump in and you're young and you're engaged in the party and wanting to help and volunteer, your podcast was this amazing sort of entry doorway where people who would never kind of talk to you or maybe give you the time of the day or you really looked up to, they were having these in-depth conversations and they were sort of explaining. And I think that's also what's quite interesting about the area we live in now. It used to be so difficult to get information or expensive. You go to a university or you have to get into a program. People are just giving it away for free all over. And so I listened to it a lot, and I was a sort of youngish labor hack, and I was at the Chiefly Center. They have the research center. They have their event once a year, right?
Yeah.
And I saw Chris Bowen there, and I had recently listened to an episode he was on, and you two were talking about The Dollop, that history comedian podcast.
Yep.
And so I started listening after that. Really funny, amazing episode. There was one episode called Moving Day, and it was back in New York. There was a day everyone's lease ended on the exact same day, so everyone had to, and it just caused this madness. And anyway, so I happened to be walking up the stairs at this event, same time as Bowen. Well, I should say something. So I bring up the dollop, and then I listened to it in the New York episode. We ended up having this sort of 10-minute conversation, and laughing and whatever. And then he has to go off, shake hands, goes away. I go back to my Labour hack friends. They're like, "Oh, you were talking to Chris for so long," and I was like, "Ah, yeah, we're friends. It's no big deal. Whatever." Blah blah blah. Later that day, I'm walking with my friend. Chris is walking the other way, and I say, "Oh, hey," and he turns to me and goes, "Oh, hi, Ethan. Hope your day's going well." And all my friends called me Ethan for the rest of the week. So yeah, but just that moment of like you kind of brag to your friends, and then just
then completely fucking shut the bed.
But obviously that episode you had with Dan was great and really interesting, and to see someone who has done so much being maybe a bit more of a relaxed reflective mode was great, because I only had 2 conversations with Dan. I was randomly at an event somewhere out in the country, and we were in a circle with a few people talking, and I kept thinking, oh, you should say something. This is a really good opportunity to ask him a question, get some advice or learn something. And there was a bit of a space in the conversation, and I just blurted out, how do you get your shirt so white and bright? I don't know why. The show was very nice and clean, and this guy, he's very good at press conferences. He can take many questions, but I think the randomness of the question got to him, and he was really nice about it. He said, I go to a dry cleaner. And of course he's not like coming home after 20 hours of work and has this secret formula where he mixes like vinegar and brimstone in a cauldron or whatever. But as the event is wrapping up, I see Dan again. He says goodbye. He's really nice. He remembers my name. And he asked me, who are you going home with? And I say, that's sort of private. And then he looks at me with concern and he says, mate, I wasn't trying to pry. I just wanted to know if you needed a lift, if you had a way to get home safe. And I just I was like, I'm just going to walk in front of a car, I think. So anyway, you had a much more productive conversation with him, but in my experience, always a very lovely guy, and has his very unique, I think, memory. In terms of he seems to be really good at just remembering people and details.
Absolutely. And some politicians are very good at that, whereas I'm the opposite. I need to spend time with someone.
For sure. I think about how often, I think it's also a really important skill for community organizers. And I don't think it's necessarily a thing about being disrespectful. I think that just social situations are awkward and you can be overwhelmed. And that moment where you introduce yourself to someone and you shake their hands and you're so focused on getting like that not awkward, they repeat their name and you're in your head, you forgot it.
Yeah. Between that and me trying to remember all the years that the Boston Celtics have won an NBA title, there's only so much space in my head.
Yeah, of course.
For those things. We're going to talk about comedy, but before that, we are going to talk a little, let's ground ourselves in our conversation here in the thing that brings us together, which is the wonderful Australian Labor Party. What's your origin story? Like, how did you find yourself becoming a young Labor hack, to use your own words?
I don't think I was ever that much of a hack, but
you went to a Chifley conference in Sydney, right? Like
for fun.
Yeah, exactly. On your own dime. Like, come on.
Yeah. My grandparents on my mum's side were German Jews, and a lot of the family dies in the Holocaust, but my grandparents luckily get out in some pretty exceptional circumstances. Actually, my grandpa was in Spain when Hitler came to power, and he had this brush manufacturing company. He was selling in Spain, those brushes with detergent in the handle?
Yeah.
That was like the iPhone of the time. So he was there, and the Franco-Civil War had broken out, and his dad had given him some money basically to go off and do that. And he called his dad and said, I think I got to leave. It's getting hectic here. And he was like, I gave you a loan, you're staying. And then the next day his friend and business partner got shot in the head. So he, spoke to his dad again. His dad was like, well, don't go back to Germany. And so he went to Manchester, and they put him in an internment camp, and they basically said, you can either, because you're an enemy alien, basically, you're German.
Because he's German citizenship.
Yeah, and he's like, it's tough. And his father was an officer in World War One for Germany. So
yeah, right.
It was also complicated because there was a deep sense of national pride. Anyway, he ends up joining the British Army and basically spends his 20s fighting Nazi Germany. And then even after he was stationed in Berlin, I think in 45, 46, so the war had ended, but there was actually quite a few troops still there because there were concerns around the Soviets and another war would break out. But his family escaped here. On my dad's side, they're Yemenite Jews. It's one of the oldest civilizations, Jewish civilizations that there was, and there are none left. No Jews left in Yemen. Almost all of them migrated. Basically, it's just to say that when you kind of grow up with that background, you get a sense of the power of government and attitudes towards people, and how things so quickly can go bad, and what I guess stimulates society to be aggressive and hateful, and what is one that tries to foster a sense of generosity and care for each other. And then also a deep gratitude to grow up here that I think isn't reflected on a lot. But I mean, it's not just the fact that you live in relative peace, but our sewage system works and everything works pretty well. And I have taken many issues with government here and there and whatever, but also to return to that sense of gratitude around that. But I think what really kind of made me think deeper about social democracy and where we allocate resources was I went to a state school, but a lot of my friends went to private schools, so I sort of got to see both worlds, right? And one had a swimming pool and a lounge, and my school had safe needle disposals. This is a very different environment we grew up in. I couldn't believe it. In my head, it was, okay, well, a bunch of kids with wealthy parents go here, and so that's how they have these resources. And then you go through the budget papers and you see, well, actually, quite a lot of resources from the government also go to these places, which I don't think is a problem. I think you should be trying to uplift everyone wherever they are. But when you see the disparity, and also as I left high school, the disparity of outcomes, the majority of people go to a public school, and I think the dollar for dollar value is, for every $1 that's spent on a public school student, $3 goes to a private school student. There's numbers in states and federal, and there's a difference to it, but I think that you need to be conscious about that resource allocation. The good thing about things like TAFE and broadly having free education is that you give people an opportunity to build skills and be independent. I think what maybe separates a little bit about the thinking behind Labor in Australia and then the Democrats, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this, is that there is a really deep sense that a job and your work is a really fundamental part of being alive, and it gives you meaning, and that's really important. And it's not just about a job for pay. A job should be a place that is hopefully rewarding, or gives you a sense of contribution. There are broader social outcomes to giving people a stake in society than just you have money. I don't know. Do you recognize that?
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think that I remember one of my brothers is a plumber, and he worked for our Uncle Jimmy, who passed away a couple of years ago. But I remember at it was some sort of family event, and Uncle Jimmy was talking about the importance of being a plumber. Now, a lot of people would just think, you're a plumber. There's a joke in the trade community is sort of you're as dumb as a plumber. So I think the sort of the butt of all the jokes within all the different trades. But he was talking about, if you don't have plumbers, we don't have clean water. If we don't have clean water, then people don't live in healthy societies. Like, it's pretty important that the role a plumber plays in our community, right? We don't, and you were talking before about sewerage, some basic sort of fundamentals that we all take for granted, but it all happens because of plumbers. I think that goes to the heart of the dignity of work and all of the different roles we play. And sometimes I think, particularly all of us in the professional class, can probably shit on some folks that are in trades, right, is a lower standard of work, that's a mug's game because they're probably earning double what we are. But like the old adage was years ago, when I was a kid, it was like, do maths and go to university. And I reckon now what is happening is parents are saying, go to TAFE, get a trade, and so you can raise a family in a comfortable lifestyle.
For sure. I think it's also working in an office it's really Kafkaesque sometimes. You don't know if you're helping. You're just pushing around paper and things are going in circles. And it can be a very isolating experience for working as well. One of my favorite movies, you ever seen Brazil by Terry Gilliam?
No, which is interesting because massive
fantastic
Python fan. So no, I've not seen Brazil.
Anyway, it's sort of a masterpiece in lamenting on that sort of Kafkaesque feeling of absurdity when you're working in an office. And you definitely, when it comes to trades, I also like that about the party, that it's deeply engaging people who are working in the fundamental parts of the economy that actually build things. I have a lot of friends who are comedians, a lot of sort of working class, particularly in the post-COVID years or whatever. There was such a deep anger and feeling of disconnect. People maybe who are traditional Labor voters. And I had close relationships with these people. I was the only person they knew who sort of had any contact with government. And it was amazing the questions they would ask. There's such a distance between how people think government functions and if it does, and this dreaming up of grand conspiracies when it's like, it took me 8 hours to try to fix a printer one day. Like, it's there's really this feeling. And I think that getting more people involved in government from different sectors could maybe alleviate the conspiratorial, even if you have one person in your family who works there, you have someone to connect to say, okay, they're not an evil lizard. What's going on? I know they're a decent person who are just trying to do their job. And I think in that absence, maybe that's why we've seen such a rise in conspiratorial thinking and populism. But I think it's also why the work that you did, bringing out sort of ground campaigns, was so important. But I guess my question is, before that was really going on, because that's the context in which I got involved, how were we running campaigns? How were we doing that broad engagement?
I mean, really, it's an interesting question. And because because what we all know as field has really kind of now been embedded in what a traditional Labor Party campaign looks like now for over a decade, which in my brain, it doesn't feel like it's been that long. But I guess the first time we sort of had some kind of semblance of a robust field program was in the 2013 federal campaign and then the 2014 state election here in Victoria. But before that, our volunteer capacity for Labor Party members, and it was only Labor Party members, like we didn't ask people who were not members of the Labor Party but may have been Labor Party supporters, so they historically probably vote at every election for the Labor Party, but we never asked them to get involved in politics at that level. So it was only our Labor Party members. They would letterbox materials, so not talk directly to the voter, wouldn't bother walking up the steps to the door and knocking on it, just dropping off a bit of material. And the only reason they did that was probably that campaign couldn't afford to pay for the direct mail. There might have been a little bit of door knocking, but it really depended on the candidate. I remember John Lenders, who was running for the state seat of Dandenong North. We had a whole bunch of young Labor kids for a whole day, basically pretty much knock all of Dandenong North in the absolute pissing rain. And it was lightly raining in the morning. And then it really started to get heavy. And I thought, when we saw his car rock up, I thought, he's going to say, call it a day because it's pretty wet now. But he popped up popped open the boot and had been to Bunnings or somewhere and then bought a whole heap of umbrellas and said, there you go for it again. But it was so heavy, the fucking umbrellas did not last at all. It was torrential rain. Anyway, knocking on someone's door and looking like you'd been a drowned rat, actually gathered favours with the people knocking on the door. They're going, oh, you poor things. Do you want a cup of tea or do you want a towel or whatever? So it was quite nice. But broadly, that didn't happen. Like, we didn't knock on doors. So political communication between, the party apparatus, which is in those days was members, and the community, really was quite limited. And that was one of the reasons why I thought that we needed to adjust or change the way that we campaigned. Because I do remember standing over a folding machine, like a letter folding machine in this is back in the days of Michael Danby's office in 2001. And it was a massive mail out that we're trying to get out to the entire electorate. And the folding machine kept on breaking down. It was this old folding machine that just constantly broke down. And it was like 4:00 in the morning. And it broke down again. And I'm absolutely exhausted. And we've been doing this now for 24 hours. And we needed to get it to Australia Post by 10 a.m. that next morning. And at this moment, I was like, who's going to read this letter? Like, who actually is going to read this letter? Because I'm over it. Like, I am over it. And I lived in the electorate. And I lived in an apartment building, like one of those bigger apartment buildings in South Bank. And I remember 2 days later, I went to the mail room to get my mail from the letterbox. And there was some junk mail in there. And I remember separating it out. And there's a little bin in the corner. And I got the junk mail and I popped open the bin and went to drop in my junk mail. And then there is all of our letters in the bin. God. And I was just amazing. This is a disaster. Like, no one's reading this shit, So that was just one of the many moments in this journey of something's got to give, something's got to change. We've got to start to directly communicate with voters on a meaningful level. And it has to start with us talking to people. But obviously, we didn't have enough members of the party, and we needed to go find new people, and that brought in the concept of organising, and led to a whole bunch of other different things. But
but that's what's so interesting about you in this sort of critical juncture and how the party works is, how do you convince a machine this big and this traditional to maneuver? Because it takes money, it takes time, and how did you go about leading the campaign to change campaigning?
Look, I guess it starts, I organised within the party first, basically. And so what that meant was coming up with a strategy of how I wanted to convince people. Luckily, I was the assistant secretary, so there was some power that I held. But it's in one of the very first things you do when you start to organize is you build relationships with people, with allies. And so I went and found power points within the party. So people within the caucus, people within the trade union movement, people within the administrative side of the party that were either allies or potential allies, had one-on-ones with them and told them about what I wanted to do and shared the strategy, and then asked them, how can we make a commitment to each other and to this program to make sure that it happens? How do we fulfill this mission? And so, I'm happy to name people, but like Martin Foley from the left was really crucial in that. James Molino from the right was really crucial in that. Jala Pulford from another part of the right, because remember there's like 8 different parts of the right. So I just sort of pinpointed different people, like Lizzie Ratcliffe, who was in the Premier's office, was really important in that. And then obviously people I worked with at head office. If I couldn't convince Noah Carroll, the secretary, and Cos Samaras, my fellow assistant secretary, of the value of this. So I just spent a lot of time doing a lot of one-on-ones and bringing them around to this idea, but also hearing from them about what do you think I need to do as well to make this happen? Because in the end, what I needed the party to say, yes, we will invest in a field program. Like, we will hire field organisers. And that means, like, the money doesn't grow on trees for Labor Party. So we actually had to take money from one part and move it to another part. And the thing that took the hit the biggest was our mail campaign. At a state election, we spent $1.2 to $2 million on direct mail. And that was Cos's area. And for him to let that go was huge, right? That's him giving up a lot of responsibility and also a lot of control within the campaign. And he saw value in the field program
Yeah.
to say, yeah, no, let's invest a lot of this money. So we redirected a lot of that money into hiring the field organisers, and that was that doesn't happen without COS going, yeah, okay, let's do this, right? So I guess it's just you got to sit down with people and build relationships. You got to have a strategy, but that's not it, right? Because then once you start to roll the program out and you send field organisers out there, they're getting told fuck off by candidates or MPs who don't want to change the way it's been done, or even branch members who are hostile to this sort of what they saw as American mumbo jumbo.
Yeah. But okay, so you get it, it's going, you have the coalition of the willing, you're moving forward with it. And then, because campaign, it kind of drives me crazy because it's so clunky and old and whatever, and it looks, but this incredible sort of store of what is the public thinking, trying to match that gap. At what point do you realize, oh, this is actually a gold mine of information, of understanding that we've been missing? Was there a moment of crystallization of this is actually helpful?
It's one area that I think actually we can continue to improve in is the sort of feeding it back up the chain into the command, into the campaign.
Yeah.
In every a well executed field program, and remember, a door knock or a phone call, and a lot of people think they just think that's what field is. It's more than that. There's so much more that has to go into it to find those volunteers, build those relationships, structure those people, identify leadership, get them to take ownership of the campaign, for them to go recruit more people, to go train them in the skills they needed to do to organise, to go then in the end, and that's organising, right? And then there's the mobilising part, which is then when you move and get commitment from all the people in your campaign to go knock on a door and make a call, right? That's just the last bit. And that's just a tactic. That's a tactic that we are deploying right now in order to shift votes to the Labor candidate or the party. But in that tactic, when a good organizer deploys that, at the end of that shift, they should ask all the volunteers together as a debrief, how'd you go? What did you hear on the doors?
Yeah.
What are the concerns that are coming up? And the earlier you do that, the more you learn about the constituency that you're seeking to engage with. And then you make adjustments, because there's no point, because I've been on campaigns, really good field campaigns, where we went out and mobilized thousands of people and we were saying the wrong things to the wrong voters and we didn't shift the needle.
Yeah.
Our message was wrong. So you need to listen to the people you're talking to on the doors, but there's got to be a process upon which you can gather that information structurally. So it's not kind of just chaotic and everyone's like water being blown back in your face like a fire hydrant, just go like, shit, how do I deal with all this information? But it has to be two-way. Otherwise your campaign becomes what we call leadership island. It is isolated from the constituency you're seeking to engage with.
Was there ever a moment where you could sort of track between maybe something that happened in the leadership and your ability to recruit? Was there ever a through line between that?
So are you asking, I like how you turned this into your podcast, by the way, Raph. This is impressive. I'm going to talk about you and your comedy, which we will get to. You're not getting off the hook, by the way. So is your question, when you talk about leadership, who do you mean? Do you mean the leadership within the volunteer?
Yeah, I mean within the party, because I think a lot of this is so focused on where in politics is campaign, but a lot of it is sociological experiments that most academics would dream of being able to do, but they're a lot of times just reading the same sort of stuff, but you're really engaging the public in what motivates them, what gets them off the couch.
Yeah, right.
How do you do that? And
Gotcha.
And because you've sort of got this bird's eye macro level of seeing, okay, well, in this period we recruited this many people. Could you get to a point where you were maybe predicting, oh, I think if we go out now or whatever, or is it just sort of a sustained sort of run through, always be present, always be having conversations type thing?
Yeah, no. Okay, that is a good question. No, and I think you know the answer to it. It's the latter. We always must be out there organising, and bringing in more people into our community, into our campaign. There are moments where there is a rich opportunity, and there are moments when it's tough. When Jacinda Ardern became the leader of the Labor Party in New Zealand, they had been the field operation there. The New Zealand Labor Party's Community Action Network had been organising for a number of months. And so they had a volunteer capacity. They had started to develop leadership out of those volunteers. So they had some structure, but, it wasn't going gangbusters. It was going okay, but it wasn't, they weren't kicking. They weren't like the All Blacks kicking the Wallabies' ass or anything. They were just struggling along, right?
Yeah.
Then Jacinda becomes a leader, and she's incredibly motivating and inspiring, and it ignites a fire under the bums of all centre lefties and progressives in all of those cities and towns across New Zealand. And they all want to either donate money or get involved in the campaign, or work out ways in which they can get involved in the campaign. Yeah. So we then had the infrastructure. The New Zealand Labor Party had the infrastructure to take all of those people and organise them effectively. Because I've been on campaigns where a lot of people have got involved, but there's no organisational capacity to know how to deal with all of them, right? And so they were ready for that. But in those moments when it's challenging and people are less likely to do it, well, then the success is grounded in this. Marshall Gantz talks about leadership through the lens of head, heart, and hands. The head represents the strategic, the how we get from A to B. The heart represents the pathos, the sort of the why we need to get from A to B, the emotive side of how we operate. And the hands are the doing of the work. It's the action. It's the meaningful action. You can have the best strategy in the world, but if people aren't motivated to turn up, then it's a waste of a strategy. But also at the same time, you can have the most motivated people in the world, but if you don't have a strategy, then you're going to waste that resource. So you need to engage both the head and the heart of the person you're seeking to bring into this work in order for them to use their hands. And a lot of times in political campaigns, particularly in the Labor Party, we're very head heavy, very strategic, but not a lot of heart. And a lot of heart is there's asking people what their personal story is. What is their story of self? What is the story of us? Narrative and stories, it's a practice, right? Yeah. To engage the heart of self, of us, and of now. Relationship building, taking the time to actually get to meet people in their place. What motivated them? Why are they involved in this campaign? Why are they doing this work? Is also an engagement of the heart. All the other stuff is head, right? Like knocking on doors and making calls or whatever. That's sort of all strategic. But if we don't take the time to get to know the people and foster those relationships, then it all just falls apart and people stop coming back.
Yeah, I think that's sort of to segue back to comedy, that you can be an amazing writer, but if you're not a good performer, like it doesn't translate. And there are some people who are just way better at performing than maybe their jokes are settled. But I mean, it's all public speaking, right? But your ability to engage a crowd and connect with them. And I watch a lot of people in leadership roles and politicians, but also you can watch business leaders and whatever, and you watch them sort of get up and they're quite nervous and they're not really great at telling a story, or they're fumbling over their words. And it's interesting because, I hang out with these sometimes 19-year-old kids who maybe dropped out or whatever, and they can get up, and their ability to tell a story and crack an audience, it's incredible. It's such an amazing, and it's something that can be worked on. But I think that, when you have someone like Jacinda Ardern, Obama, and, certain Republican leaders who, when that ability is so good at getting cut through, I don't know, people respond to authenticity, and it's amazing, I think, how much that can go missing. I think particularly because a lot of the time a member of parliament might be so busy or whatever, they don't get time to maybe sit and reflect and think, okay, what does this mean? Or what does it mean to sort of be standing in front of a crowd? The speech isn't just it's not just a process or an honor I get to do, but it is a chance to be compelling and win people over.
Yeah, absolutely. For some reason, we've hardwired a lot of our politicians to not be authentic, to not be vulnerable, to not open up, to not tell either their story. And even then, even within that, I don't think they understand how to construct a story that is grounded in values and not it turn into a CV. Because sometimes you'll get a story out of them, but it's just their CV. It's like, oh my God, kill me now, right? It's hard. Like, it's hard to coach them and train them on that, to find those moments, because they just, you said a word before, reflection. They don't reflect on moments that have led them to doing this work today. Like, I asked you right at the start of this episode, like, what drew you into doing this political work? And you naturally, what did you do? You started talking about your grandparents. You didn't talk about yourself, and we do that. We just start talking about other people and not talk about ourselves. Because I don't know why, there's something we just don't want to give, right? But actually, public leadership requires internal reflection about who we are, what are the moments that led us to do this, and I'm not good at it either. I've had to reflect a lot on these key moments, not just in my youth, but also even in my sort of early adult life, that has led me to doing this work. But I spend my whole time organizing. So if I can't nail it, then we're in trouble, right? But so that's a good segue, right? Because I want to ask about, what are the moments that led you to thinking that you were funny?
I don't think it was. It was sort of more of a, the classic story of there are two fishes and they're swimming along, and then another fish comes by, and the fish says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And then it goes by, and the fish turns to the other fish and says, "What the hell is water?"
Mm-hmm.
It's my parents were funny, not always on purpose, but I had this dad who, thick accent, he'd say things like obtus, and he was just very funny and big. My mom was funny, my grandpa was so funny, my uncle was funny, my brother was funny, and all I wanted to do was hang out with funny people. And so I didn't think I was particularly funny, but I enjoyed making people laugh. I also think that maybe my household was, a traditionally ethnic, maybe loud and emotional, intense place to be. And humor was an offset to some of that, I think. So it was a de-escalation tool. It was also an escalation tool as well, because
Mm-hmm.
you would rile people up. But so I think for humor wasn't maybe something I thought I was. I just thought it was how people are, and it was a way to behave. Uh, I started actually in sort of performance arts. I did a lot of well, I hate admitting this, but I did a lot of slam poetry. And slam, it's like, look, they'll clap everything. It can be really fun, but it also can be a bit. I think you're maybe playing to the sentiments, not of the crowd, but of society, and you got to say the right things and whatever. And I started to enjoy, before I do a poem uh, or tell a story, I would crack a joke, and I realized I actually enjoyed that part the most. And then after COVID as well, the same thing. Everyone, COVID happens, and you start thinking about all the things I didn't do in my life. It's and and that everything can be taken away by like that, and you should just try things. So I went down to a local club, and it's like at the back of the bar, and there's like four people, and two of them are asleep. And it went well. And then all of a sudden, I'm meeting all these people from all these different backgrounds who have crazy life stories. And it became this really beautiful thing. So I was just mainly meeting people and having a good time. And then there's like every year about 600 comics go into this sort of competition just for like 5-minute bits. And you go through heats, and then like state finals, and then there's a SBS sort of publishes or films this thing for TV, and I ended up making it through that, and that was amazing. I got runners up that year, and that was a great experience. And then I got to the next year was part of the comedy festival's Comedy Zone, which is just a selection of up and coming comedians, and there you hang out with comedians. And then I did the Comedy Festival Roadshow, and I got to fly to Darwin and Alice Springs with professional comedians, and you're doing massive theaters there. And it's wild to sort of walk out, and it's just a mass of people wall to wall laughter. You're kind of freaking out the whole time,
Mm.
and then you walk off, and then you just go back to sort of regular life. But uh, it's a great community to be a part of. It's not a particularly lucrative one, but I think that's why you do it. It doesn't matter how big you get. There's not much money in it, so you're in it for the love.
Billy Connolly talks about he finds doing stand up in front of smaller audiences more intimidating than the big audiences, because he says that doing it in smaller theaters is like doing comedy in front of your aunties. They're not that impressed and they just fold their arms and think, entertain me. But if you're not funny, I'm going to let you know. And whereas in the big audiences, people get lost in the crowd because it's so huge.
Yeah.
What's your take on what you prefer, given you've had a bit of experience of both?
Oh yeah, you'd rather do 1,000 people than two. It's two people. You're having a conversation. You're just standing in front of them with a microphone. It's weird. But unfortunately, that's the path is you got to do that. You got to do that. But what it teaches you, if you can make four people in a crowded pub laugh, like with only four people watching and everyone else is doing, and they're loud behind it and someone's having a fight, that if you can do that, you can master a large crowd. I think it's also why you by the time you get to a big crowd, you're probably not likely to bomb as bad, because you've sort of figured out what works and what doesn't a bit. But
although 500 people in crickets also could be quite terrifying within itself.
yeah, it can be. Luckily, so far all the big gigs I've done have gone pretty well. But
touch wood. Let's talk about your act itself. What are you trying to what are you trying to communicate? Like what's at the heart of what your comedy is based on?
Look, I think this is the trick that can happen when you're a comedian. You can get too focused on having a message. I mean, your number one job is to make people laugh. But I think what I find I enjoy writing about is sort of bringing levity to things that maybe stress me out or worry, or I might beat myself up about, and then you sort of say it out loud and you realize a lot of people have done something stupid or have stupid thoughts, and a stupid person who lives in their head who says dumb things. And so I think it's catharsis. And there's also, I think one of the amazing things about laughing in a room full of people is there might be something secret that you worry about, and then someone makes a joke about it and everyone laughs, and it's this involuntary indication that everyone has the same anxiety, the same fear, this same thing they didn't even realize they were doing subconsciously. So I think a bit of it is about the struggle with identity, and how identity is this quite absurd thing, or a lot of the language around identity is that it is something that you choose, but a lot of the time it's chosen for you, and you are not in control of your brand. So whether you're Jewish or brown or Muslim or a woman or a queer, a lot of that branding is happening out for you, and you're kind of roped into it, and it leads you to very absurd situations. And I reflect on times when I've been mistaken as someone who's Muslim, and it's made people really angry. And I didn't tell them. I just went along and I was like, okay, what does it feel like to be this? And, I remember when I was 9, I just moved to Brisbane, and someone at school called me the N-word. And I remember when I heard it, I thought, oh man, does this mean I can say the N-word? And I was like,
can't believe that's where you go.
Like they were trying to hurt me, and I was like, I got angry, but I was also like, okay. And then I remember
I'm at a club now.
I was like at home, and we're like at dinner, and I'm like, oh, I'll give this a whirl. And I think when I said something like N-word, please, my dad's face was very much like N-word. What? Like what? You what? Yeah. And and it became this weird thing where I realized like this word can be used to denigrate my humanity, but I can't show off that I know all the rap lyrics in a Kendrick Lamar song. So it's this bizarre thing that you kind of sit on, but at the end of the day, you're not all these things. Like I'm just an idiot walking around, and So there's a lot, I think, to explore there, and to you open up and you're like, oh, a little bit about me. I'm diverse. I used to be brown, but now I'm diverse. Uh, I don't know when it happened. I just know that's what they call me at work when they want to point out that I'm brown. And once a quarter, they make me and the other brown people have morning tea together. So and I'm not offended or anything. I just think I think this stuff can be funny, and I think that humor is a good way to sort of pierce the seriousness and the absurdity of things. And uh, I, again, I don't want to be a political commentator with this stuff. I think I just want to point out the absurdity of just being alive. And I think this is also the great skill of good comedians, right? They will tell jokes that everyone feels, oh my God, I feel exactly the same about that. And then so they feel aligned with you. And then you can tell your story about being different, and they go, and it helps them kind of understand, oh, we're just exactly the same. You're just stuck in this body.
Mm.
And that's a great way to communicate. Because I also think we're stuck in this cycle of communicating with anger, and you don't understand me, and, you must be bad, and blah, 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 blah. And certainly some people are acting in bad faith, but, it takes an incredible amount of work to fully articulate your life experience is like, and particularly when that life experience is different to other people, that can be quite upsetting to them, because it's a conflict with their reality.
Do you want to
So
unpack?
yeah,
Do
I
you want
think
to
that.
unpack that?
Sorry,
Do you want to unpack that a little bit?
I think that uh, you, like, you, even with your close friends or whatever, when you get into a disagreement, and it can be quite frustrating, and there's a lot of the back and forth about who's wrong, but a lot of the times it's barely about the issue. It's you have two completely fundamental different experiences, and and so uh, and I think also sometimes opinions, that they can sort of attach themselves to our egos and our sense of who we are, and so it's being wrong or admitting fault or anything like that can feel like uh, you are being amputated, or part of your soul is amputated. Like, it's a lot to kind of confront, particularly publicly, that you might be wrong about something. Which is why I think, the comment section, there's rarely any productive discussion. If that clarifies
Yeah,
anything.
yeah, yeah. I was reflecting on obviously the connection between the greatest comics. Many of them are Jewish, and I'm thinking about one of the most famous ones, which is obviously Seinfeld. But the episode when Jerry was angry at his dentist, Tim Watley, for converting to Judaism for the jokes. Jerry says to him, Tim, should you be doing these jokes? You've only just converted 3 days ago. And he says, Jerry, it's our sense of humor that sustained our people for 3,000 years. And he corrects him and says 5,000. He says, even better.
It's so funny. Yeah.
And then asks Christy as a shtickle of fluoride. Like, that whole bit is incredibly funny. Actually, and slight segue, I'll come back to my question in a minute, but another part of that episode I love is when Jerry goes to see a Catholic priest to complain to him about the fact that Tim Watley has converted just for the jokes. And he goes and meets the priest in the confessional, and he walks into the confessional box, and there's a kneeler there. Now, anyone who's Catholic knows that you kneel on that thing. In my mind, I've never thought of that kneeler to be anything other than a kneeler. And Jerry goes into the confessional and sits on it. And the first time I saw that, I almost fucking wet myself with laughter, because my Catholic brain had got absolutely broken. I'd never considered that you would sit on it. Oh my God, I digress. But like,
I think it's funny that there's no kneeling in sort of Jewish praying, and I just imagine the complaints you'd get if you try to implement that. Just a bunch of Jews being like, my knees, blah, blah. Yeah, I don't think it'd stand a chance. Yeah.
being a comedian, but also being of Jewish ethnicity, is there some sort of, do you feel there's some sort of weight upon you in your act to address what's going on in the world right now? Or is that something you're like going, no, I'm not touching that with a 30-foot barge pole? Like,
Well, I mean, this what I mean by identity becomes this brand thing where if there's nothing that you can engage in that's going to bring people levity, it's pretty tough. And I have many Muslim comic friends and Jewish comic friends, and we all hang out, right? And I think that it's good we have this thing to connect on. I don't know. It's pretty hard. There are so many negative stories about uh, the Jewish community and sometimes the Muslim community and whatever. And I think that I would like to be a counter to that. And that's not to deny anyone's experience, whatever. So it's hard to talk about. Okay, I'll tell you one story around after the October 7. Some members of my family, their village was attacked, and I guess I could sense that war was going to happen, and all the awful things that come with it. And I felt worried for my family, and there were things obviously going on in Sydney and people chanting stuff, and sort of memories of what happened to your grandparents, and people really, for their own reasons, feel a deep sense of anger and hatred. And I stopped doing comedy. I wasn't doing it well, and then after a while, a Muslim comic, a guy with a Muslim background, sort of checked in on me. He's like, "Bro, where have you been?" And I said, "Look, I just think I'm feeling a lot of fear and shame. I just don't feel like doing comedy anymore." And he wrote back something like, "Bro, I've seen your act. You should have been feeling that the whole time. Don't be stupid. Come tell jokes, right?"
Yeah.
And I came that night, and he gave me a spot, and it's a real generous thing to do in the comedian community, to on the night, this is a decent gig, come do a spot. I did a spot, and I made people laugh, and later I'm speaking to that comic, and I guess I said something along the lines of, I just feel like our blood is cheap, and it's just like acceptable to people. They can just say like, "Oh, this is just what happens." And he said, "Oh, how do you think we feel? We feel the same." And it made me think about the identity and how we're all trapped in it, and how we feel a deep sense of fear and pain, and the way people can kind of turn away from what happens to us, but we can't. And this part's not so funny, but I think that I value those relationships, and whether it's fair or not, if you are a particular minority, you got to strive to be a decent person, a good representative. And you can look at it as a bad thing, as you shouldn't have to, just because you fuck up, it shouldn't reflect on everyone else. But you can also look at it as a good thing. It is a good reason to be a decent person, to try extra hard. In many ways, that's what I think sometimes happens to MPs as well, and they say, they're just people, and you're going for this role. You. There's a great line by Chance the Rapper. He says, "The people's champ must be everything the people can't be." That's what leadership is. They're a little braver. They make maybe decisions that we might be tempted. So it's sort of I think a bit of that I'm trying to look at as a sort of blessing. I think I had one other kind of reflection on identity. I think we all do this to some extent, right? So, for example, like the Olympics, right? Do you remember how many Olympic medals we won? If you had to guess in the last one.
It was a record. It was Olympic gold or total?
Olympic gold.
Did we get to? Did we crack 20?
The important thing is, I said we. We didn't do anything. We sat on the couch.
Oh no, I'm a we. When it comes to sport, I we.
Totally. But that's the power of identity, right? It can give you self-esteem. It makes you take credit for things you didn't do necessarily. But the other side of that is it can apply credit to you for things you didn't do. maybe the left interpretation is always like, oh, don't take credit, sport and whatever, and blah, blah, blah. But, in that case, do take credit for the bad things that the country has done. It's a very delicate balance. But to widely answer your question, it's tough, but I think that the best thing you can do is be a positive representative of your community and
You just tied it all in together quite nicely there and made me reflect on a lot of things as well. I mean, I'm proud to identify as a, Irish Catholic, but the Catholic Church hasn't exactly covered itself in glory over the years. And do I identify with that kind of stuff? And it's a weird thing, because when people get stuck, like if a fellow Catholic said, geez, I'm not happy about Pell, I would agree with them internally, like that kind of, it's a closed conversation. Yeah. But if someone outside has a crack at the church broadly, I kind of get my back up a little bit, like going, all right, just calm down. Like that's, there are a lot of good people within our church that are doing very, very good work. Or maybe the Labor Party, internally, we'll have good shit fights about how we can be better. And we've done it on this podcast. But if a Liberal says to me, the Labor Party shit, blah, 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 what do we all do? We throw bricks at them, don't you ever crack at our party, mate. It's a super interesting reflection. I appreciate you sharing that with us. But I'm going to switch it up a bit, and this is my last question. But I'm going to share a story while I do it. Do you find it annoying when your friends come up to you and say, Rapha, I've got a funny bit you should put in your act?
No, I like hearing it because it's like a nice reminder that maybe I'm a more advanced writer, because I listen to that and I just know 10 ways why it won't work and why no one's going to get it and why that whatever. But every now and then it's helpful and it's good. And also I love talking about comedy and ideas and what's funny and what other people find funny. So
yeah, right.
I'm into it.
I'm going to tell you a story. It's a true story.
Okay.
And it actually is a true story.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I ran cross country all through primary school and all through high school. And my dad was the coach for my running coach. And he was the running coach for all my brothers as well, all my older siblings. And I remember when I was a kid, Dad would say to me, every night you go for a run, write in, he gave me like a journal, like a jotter. And he said, write in there, the date, time, how long you ran for, what the conditions were like, what was your heart rate at the end of the run, that kind of stuff. Basically just keep it. And so you can tally up at the end of the year. Now we all have Strava and watches and that stuff. It keeps a lot of information. But back in the 80s, it was all very much analog. Anyway, fast forward many, 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 many years later, in my 30s, two of my good friends are getting a lift to the airport. My two good friends are in the front car, and one of my friend's wife is in the back seat. She's not very good at hearing, but she was in the back seat. And my two friends at the front are talking about me. And it came up that I couldn't catch up with them for whatever reason, because I had a race and I was going for a run. And the other guy goes, oh, Stephen runs a bit, does he? And he goes, yeah, no, he's pretty serious. Like he's been doing it since he's a kid. He even keeps a running diary. Okay, now this is the bit where the wife in the back hears and starts listening. And he goes, oh, what do you mean by a running diary? He goes, what does he do? He goes, oh, he writes, when he did it and how long he did it for and the time it took, the conditions, how he felt and his heart rate. And he went, oh, right. Anyway, that was the end of the conversation. 5 months later, the wife that was in the back seat was now having a girls' afternoon party, and they were all talking, and the husband is now in the kitchen helping them prepare the food. And she says, so-and-so's got a friend who has a fucking diary. And they've gone, what? Yeah, absolutely. What does he write in it? Well, every time he does it, he writes in the date that it happened, the time that it happened, how long it took, what his heart rate was, how he's feeling, the location. How long has he been doing this for? His dad encouraged him to do it when he was a child. And my friend's cutting up like apples and then looks and goes, Claire, it was a running diary, not a fucking diary. True story.
Oh, man.
I'm still friends with those people. And every time I update my running diary, I sometimes send her a message just to remind her. I had a great run today, Claire.
Yeah.
That's yours, Rapha. You can have that.
Yeah.
All yours.
No, that's good. It's a good dinner party uh, anecdote.
Anecdote.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's very nice. You're very
I
gracious.
was going to give you a note as you were telling it.
I know the start was a bit wonky. I know.
Well, I was like, if you give the characters a name, it's like easier. But then you got to the end of the story. I was like, that's funnier than any of the stories I've told tonight.
There you go. Now, everyone out there, go see Raph. He is performing at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival. His show is called The Salmon Was Good. It's playing at Bar 1806. It's on Exhibition Street. Most nights, 6:15. There's a link in the show notes to his to the comedy festival where you can buy the tickets, basically. Anything else I need to tell the good burgers at home, Rapha, about the show?
9th to the 20th of April. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Very good. Good luck, and I'll see you on stage heckling.
Great.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Socially Democratic. Like the podcast? Hit the follow or subscribe button and be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcast or Podchaser and get all the latest updates on Socially Democratic by following us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn. And finally, a big welcome to our latest Patreon member, Paul Coughlin. Thanks for joining us, Paul, and welcome to our Socially Democratic community. See you next Friday.